Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
Barakat Salah to our Muslim brothers and sisters. It is Eid El Kabir, and it's public holiday today. A lot of Nigerians are home celebrating with family and loved ones. But what is the essence of this day for those who perhaps do not understand, and what are the lessons to take away from this day? So it's not just when it's Eid El Kabir and then we begin to show love with our brothers, with our neighbors. What are we to do beyond this day? The ram, which is usually on high demand at times like this, we saw how expensive it has become. And there the seller was explaining why it's become so expensive. Even tomatoes, onion, and so many other items that Muslims, especially at this time, would need to celebrate the Eid al-Kabir festivity. It's become almost out of the reach of the ordinary person. Well, that's on the economic side. Femi.
It's usually a trend here when you have this kind of celebration. Few days to that time, you usually experience hiking prices of goods and services. Of course, it's not peculiar to now. Before now, if you look at the trends of things due to inflation and all that. But when it comes to this particular period where we need to engage in that celebration, people especially, hike the prices of their goods and services to make more money. And it's becoming a trend. In fact, according to a survey that I did, if you need to buy RAM now, around this time last year, which was around 80,000 naira, between 80 and 100,000 naira, the least you can get now is about 300,000 naira. If I saw one malam who brought one as high as 750,000 naira, and I'm wondering.
So it depends on the size of the ram.
Depending on the size and where you're getting them from, and those items will be in high demand around this period, and as a result of that, some business owners see it as an opportunity to make more money than ever. And I feel we need to find a way to manage this trend, because for an average person that is not affordable to buy a RAM of about 750,000 naira or 300,000 naira, which is the least you can get around, I don't think it's good enough. So something has to be done, but you can't outrightly blame them, because if you look at the cost of transport, logistic, the most movement of these materials or these items, you discover that it had to the cost of these goods and services. And I also feel we also need to have this human face, even though it's not actually that easy. We understand economic conditions, but we also need to deploy this human apathy, whereby you understand with people. And I always tell people, don't go beyond your means. If you know you can afford RAM, which is about 300,000, buy what you can afford. Ensure that you're contented and you enjoy. What's more important is you celebrate in love. And for me, I think there are better ways to handle things like this. But it's usually a trend. So I'm not surprised.
But many Muslims want to have a ram slaughtered at this time. Is it compulsory? We'll be asking our guests shortly about that. But I want to point out that part of the reason why the price of ram has increased, I think too, that in terms of livestock farming, we're not doing so well as a country, because where the supply is limited and the demand is very high, you can expect that the price of that particular livestock would increase. Now, many persons want to have rams slaughtered at this time, but is ram an animal that you easily find now, particularly in this part of the country? What happens to people rearing that animal in this part of the country, so that you don't have to move them from a very long distance, and then when you add up the logistics cost to it becomes very expensive? That's one area.
Significantly, like what my neighbors did. What they do, you have 3 or 4 persons contributing money to buy one. So if one goes for at the rate of 300,000 naira, so if you have 3 people contributing money, so each person will pay like 100,000 naira. So that makes it easier and affordable for them. That's another approach which I saw some people deploy so that they could be able to buy, because RAM is so significant. If you look at the history as regards the devotion of Prophet Ibrahim to Allah, which is quite significant. So I'm not surprised that the demand for RAM at this period is high, because there's something historic about that animal.
All right, let's bring in our guest, who's a Muslim cleric and also member, Supreme Islamic Council of Nigeria. He's Nurudeen Asonugie and is also a legal practitioner. Thank you for joining us this morning. Baraka Salah.
Thank you for having me. Good morning to Nigerians. Barika Bisala.
We've been talking about RAM becoming very expensive and almost out of the reach of a common man. But is it compulsory that celebrating Eid El Kabir has to be with RAM? Let's understand the significance, the essence of this celebration.
But thank you. If we were to complain about RAM being expensive, then you cannot begin to appreciate the depth of loyalty, the depth of fidelity, the depth of commitment that the man Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam had exhibited, he had practiced within the space that was created for him to practice loyalty to the truth. He was to sacrifice his son, and he had intended to do so. There was no trace of duplicity in his preparedness, in his readiness to sacrifice his son, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala manumitted that son by substituting in his place a ram. In other words, if Ibrahim had not been faithful to the truth, all he would have compulsorily done, of course, is to sacrifice that child. So if we have an appreciation of this, then we cannot begin to talk about whether the ram is too expensive or it's not expensive. We'll just wish and pray that we have the means to afford it. It's a question of affordability. Once you can afford it, go ahead and do that. You don't talk about the amount of money, because it can never equate if you were required to come and sacrifice your own child. I haven't said that. Islam is a practical religion. It's a religion that runs on the wheel of practicality. It is not, running on the fuel or flying on the wings of sentiments and emotions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he does not try a soul beyond what he's been capacitated to do. And so, because he knows all of us, he knows our limitation, he knows the resources that are available to us. The one who is not able to slaughter does not become any the less spiritual than the one who is able to slaughter. In some instances, there will be that individual who couldn't slaughter, and yet who is by far much more robust than the one who had slaughtered. Because the one who slaughtered may just be playing to the gallery. But because only Allah can predicate the intention for why people do what they do, we are not able to say whether the one who slaughtered was playing to the gallery and the one who did slaughter was a much better person. But I'm saying that that possibility does exist. So it is contingent on capacity, ability to do so. Once you can slaughter, you have the means, you don't get deterred because of the cost, you go ahead. Where you don't do that, it becomes a debt that be required of you when you ultimately meet with your creator. Where you do not have the capacity to do so, your inability to slaughter should not even operate to come between you and the happiness that you are supposed to experience that day. Just experience the happiness as if you were slaughtering the biggest of ram, appreciating that the one who should have enabled you to do so did not grant you the enablement, not because he didn't have the capacity to do so, but because he chose not to do so. And yet you are glorifying him and you are celebrating him for not doing that for you. So you slaughter when you have the means to do so. When you don't have the means to do so, there is absolutely nothing against you.
Today's celebration is popularly known as Feast of Sacrifice. I would like you to help us to understand the significance of the devotion by Prophet Ibrahim and what he did on a day like this, and also how we can translate that to everyday living as regards the lessons.
Thank you. Ibrahim was a prophet of Allah, may Allah be pleased with him. And he grew into old age, no offspring. And all those who saw him doing God's job began to snigger at him. They began to mock him. In spite of your supposed closeness to that God that you say you have, Where is that God for you? Even before then, Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam had lived a contemplative life. He lived in the midst of people who had multiple idols that they were worshiping, that they had given their obeisance to. But common sense dictated to him that it was practically impossible for all of these that were created with the hands of man to become the object that were worthy of the obeisance of man. How can I, for example, create a thing and I begin to worship that man? And so he was doing an inward peregrination in search of wanting to vanquish the inner darkness that had engulfed him. And because, of course, once you suffer an inner darkness, it operates to obfuscate the totality of the life that the individual lives, even externally. And so he was battling that. And so he would look at the moon, for example, and say, oh, beautiful, this is God. By the time the moon would disappear, he comes into the conclusion that that which appears and disappears, that does not enjoy eternity, can't be God. And so he saw the sun. Oh, the sun was by far much, much greater than the moon, because even the moon derives its existence from the sun, because the source of energy for it is from the sun. And so when the sun set, Ibrahim said, if I am not guided aright, then I am in deep shit. The father will carve objects that people will buy and ultimately plead allegiance to as their object of protection. Ibrahim had the unfortunate responsibility of helping to market this on behalf of the father, but he was a bad marketer. Each time he went out to market these objects, Ibrahim would say, who will buy that which will neither profit you nor benefit you? You know, if I were selling a product and I begin to tell you that this product I'm selling has no utilitarian value, you must be a psychiatric to insist that you want to get that product. That was the style of Ibrahim selling whatever. On a particular day, they had congregated somewhere outside the city, and Ibrahim was left alone. He feigned illness in order to stay at home to give a pragmatic expression to what he had always wanted to do. And so he went into the temple, demolished all the idols that were there. The object with which he did the demolition, he hung it on the shoulder of the biggest of them all. And when they came, wanting to find out what had happened to their gods, their defender, who unfortunately couldn't defend themselves, they wanted to know what happened. And so Ibrahim was the only person who stayed back at home. They asked him, say, I don't know, but you can find that the object of that destruction is hanging on the shoulder of the biggest of them all. Perhaps the biggest of them all had occupied a space and was no longer comfortable with the space that he had occupied, and probably went on an expansionist whatever raid, and so he destroyed others in order to have more space to itself. They would not accept this. They said, no, that was practically impossible. Ibrahim, you have always spoken evil about this. And so he was banished. Having been found to whatever, he was thrown, if a fire was prepared, Ibrahim was thrown into that blazing fire. And because he was faithful to truth, and truth had a responsibility to be protective of Ibrahim, he got protected. He walked out of that fire unscathed. It was then he deepened his search for the true God. And having found that God, Ibrahim had no child. The same society began to mock him. Oh, you have a God who can't give you a child. He's been married, he was aged, and everything. Ibrahim went into prayers. God, give me a son. I don't desire a son just because I want to massage my masculinity or whatever ego. I need a son in order that this message that I represent, this message that I have come to incarnate, would not die with me, so that it will enjoy perpetuity if you gave me a child. He went on to demonstrate the fact that the only reason for which he needed his child was for this purpose. And he said, if you were to do this for me, there is absolutely nothing that will be too big for me to express my gratitude and how beholden I was to you, including sacrificing that same child that you have given to me. And so he got Ismail as a child. Having gotten Ismail at a very old age, Ismail became the bone, the marrow in the bones of Ibrahim. He became the blood that was floating in the veins of Ibrahim, became the very air that Ibrahim was breathing. In other words, the totality of the life of Ibrahim was not defined by the being of Ismail. So much so pixelated had Ibrahim become about the birth of Ismail, to the point that Ismail was beginning to occupy a space that was supposed to be exclusively that of the truth, which Ibrahim hitherto had demonstrated unconditional fidelity to. And so, in order to checkmate this, Ibrahim was reminded in a dream, via a dream, of the pledge that he had made, that I'm ready to sacrifice Ismail. And so he was reminded to do this. He had dismissed that in the very first instance because he just couldn't tie himself around that fact that he needed to sacrifice this child. This, my beloved child, the child that took so much time before I got him. How was that going to happen? But when the dream became persistent, Ibrahim invited the son and he said, I recall that I made a pledge with you to the Creator, and now I'm being required to fulfill that pledge. And Ismail said that you will find me loyal, you will find me faithful, you will find me ready at any material time for you to be able to fulfill the pledge that you have made to your Creator. But do not bring my mother into this conversation, because women are naturally emotional, so that she does not do anything that will come between you and the fulfillment of your promise. Fast forward, Ibrahim took Ismail. Every attempt he had made to slaughter Ismail.
Alhaji Nurudeen, can we focus more on how this can be translated? I'm sure a lot of people know the story, but how this can be translated into everyday living and what humanity represents as far as the lessons from this devotion of Prophet Ibrahim. I'd like you to dwell more on that.
Yes. Fine. Now, that's the area I was coming to. The lesson is, when you make a promise, that promise defines who you are. When you make a promise, it doesn't matter whether the person to whom the promise is made has the capacity to discipline you or not. If you violated a promise, it is not the person to whom the promise is made that is the victim. You are the victim. It will mean that you are less a human being. It will mean that you are a man without honor. And once you are not draped in the costume of honor, then you are an excess luggage in humanity. And so you find that today we have made pledges, thousands and millions of them, that we have never fulfilled. If we were honest, it was in a state of ecstasy that Ibrahim had made that promise. But he was not bothered about the fact that, oh, yeah, I just said that, I was intoxicated with joy, so I didn't know when I said what I said. That was not the issue. Did I say so? Yes. So he went ahead to fulfill. Just come to think about it. Whether you are in government or you are being led, if each one of us were to be faithful in this country today to the promise that we have made to ourselves and to society, then you can be sure that society will become a much better place. If each one of us could tame and domesticate our proclivities that are fiendish, that do not help in the edification of society, you can just be sure that the world will be like paradise for all of us. We will have peace, absolute peace, because we have issues because of us wanting to gratify our whims and caprices. That was what Ibrahim والسلام, did not do. And so centuries after he's gone, he's still being remembered. He lives in the immortality of that fact. If he had retained Ismail to say as a desire, for example, serving as a metaphor for whatever represents our own desire, if he had retained Ismail, he is long gone. Ismail would have been gone because Ismail still went in spite of his being faithful. So if we were faithful, you find that our humanity becomes richer for that. Our humanity is favored for that. Our humanity gets deepened. It will mean that we will live a communal life. That communal life that helps to create abundance. Because the scarcity that we watch, you just were talking about the issue of RAM being high, or foodstuff being high. All of that are a consequence of people wanting to fulfill a deity of being opulent. I want to be the richest man on the earth and stuff like that. You become that rich man, but it doesn't translate to any happiness, because the richest man in the world that you know today is certainly not the happiest person, because on a regular basis, he comes into the realization that a conurbation does exist between poverty and wealth. So it doesn't matter by how far he had pushed the boundary of poverty away from himself, the common neighbor to the wealth that he has, even if it were in trillions of
Let's
dollars.
take a look at this value of Ibrahim that you talked about, meaning he was a man of his words. He had agreed to sacrifice his son, and eventually he went on to fulfill that until God gave him a substitute that he could use as sacrifice instead of his son. In today's word, we find that is not very common. Some people say one thing and they mean another, or they say one thing at the point of implementation becomes a different ball game. How can that virtue be taught to children? How can it grow with people? What are the ways to nurture this virtue?
But the virtue that a mentor would communicate must be to a mentee, must be a virtue that the mentor believes in. When a mentor does not believe, words beyond their verbal quantification have a spiritual dimension. The mentee will have a way of knowing that what you're telling me is a lie. I'll give you one clear example. You come to a university, for example, where you find a professor emeritus, a professor of agriculture, a professor of animal husbandry, a professor of fishery. You just give example that there is a diet of this animal, that probably explains why. And so he's teaching another person all about animal husbandry, how to keep animals, how to raise animals, how to multiply them. It doesn't have an animal farm. It doesn't have one. So he does not believe in it. Because if you are interested in a thing, interest will generate passion. And passion will ultimately make that particular thing to grow and never to die. So that kind of a lecturer, taking as example, how does he become a mentor for a mentee who wants to do animal husbandry? So it will just mean that the knowledge, whatever that is being acquired, is acquired for the fun of it, to be able to use it for other purposes other than that which is communicated. So as parents, if we wanted our children to imbibe the virtues of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, Ibrahim is too distant. Let us first incarnate that Ibrahim. Let them see it in us. Let the kids come to the realization that when my father says, I am going to give you A, my dad does not find excuses around why A is not given. No matter how difficult, he goes on to fulfilling that. When my father says he's going to beat you, or a mother says to a child, I'm going to beat you, regardless of what is done after, go ahead to beat that child, so that he knows that for every word you have spoken, you give expression to it. When we then we run into serious problem. I cannot, for example, tell the children that it is wrong for you to steal public funds. And so the child can't tie his head around the properties that I own. He begins to see that, you can't marry what I have with the resources or where I work, what I'm supposed to be earning. And so when you say that to a child, it's arrant nonsense. But once there is a communication, that was what existed between Ibrahim and his father. There had been a relationship. It was on the basis of that relationship that Ismail trusted the father. That if God had made this demand on me, so go. So we must first be the ones who would say, hey, we've done a lot of this rubbish, and so it's not paying. Can we be more communal in our dealings, be much more faithful in all of the things that we do? You can, for example, have a station where you say there are adult stuff children should not watch. Why should it be adult stuff? Why must children not watch? If it's not good enough for the children, it's obviously not good for anybody. If the child is not deserving of toys, the adults are equally not deserving of toys. If I'm going to tell the children that, it pays for you to read and to internalize what you have read, they should find me as a reader. They should find me as the one giving practical expression to that which I have read. Once I'm distant from the things I'm communicating to them, there will be the pretense. I will only sound authoritarian to these kids. And once I'm authoritarian, the implication, of course, is that engagement will become less. They are not as engaging with me as they ought to be. Whatever it is they have memorized in the course of me telling this thing is mechanical, and that will not be sustainable. So we must first, before telling the kids to do what is right, we must do what is right. So if I'm carrying my kids and I say, oh, I'm late for a program, and I beat the traffic light, how am I going to tell the child, oh, sorry, you see, it's 9. There was no vehicle coming from the other side. It is 9 now, so I just have to move. I have communicated the message. If I'm with the king and I'm sounding abusive, somebody has done something to me, I couldn't tame my passion, my anger, so I give it back to that person. It's a message that I'm communicating. Oh, daddy was by the traffic light. The traffic light said don't go. I'm driving with the kids. They discovered that I took water. I didn't throw the can away because it is not the best thing to do. The children are learning because that example that they are seeing speaks volume in a way that a trillion words will not be able to do. So it has to do a
Talking about
reorientation of
something being mechanical, you gave the example of parents being authoritarian to their children and then giving them instructions of what to do. You can make them even recite verses of maybe the Quran and things that you want them to do, but it's just a thing that they do to please you. It's not internalized. Now, let's bring this to the adults now. On a day like this, when some people may say, oh, what is the obligation or what is necessary to celebrate this day? One of them is the slaughtering of ram, and the person has the capacity to do so, but they just do all that is formally needed for a day like this without having their heart and attitude in line with the essence of this day. And so when the period of celebration is over, they revert back to who they were. How can such be changed?
Yes, you see, it can only be changed when the individual redefine what the focus is. You see, if my focus is about here, meaning this world, how do I become famous? How do I become important? How do I exercise power? It will mean that I am more concerned about here, which is an illusion, as against that which is realistic. And so effort must be made to get people to speak more about that day that is certain, that day that is eternal. Because just imagine any difficulty that is associated with our existence today, the extreme of it, and ask yourself the question, what is the likelihood that I could suffer that difficulty? And even if I were to suffer that difficulty, how long will it last? I have seen people in the hospital going through excruciating pains as a result of cancer. And shortly after then, they died. It will mean that once they died, the pains associated with that cancer was gone. I have seen people who have enjoyed opulence. They ate the best of food, drove the best of cars, and they are gone because they were tied to time, as it were. I have seen those who occupied power. I was somewhere on Wednesday, and I saw two persons, and I went back home and I was telling my kids, I saw two persons. One of them between 1999 and 2007 was a man that could not be arrested even if he had committed murder because he was a deputy governor. And I had seen another one between 1999 who was there too. Between 1999 and 2015, you couldn't arrest him even if in the open he had committed murder, because between 1999 and 2007, he was both a deputy governor and a governor. And between 2007 and 2015, he was a vice president and a president. So you couldn't arrest him. But he was in that all now a nobody. If he did anything, he could be picked up. It does mean that whatever power he had exercised was for a time certain. But if our focus is the fact that I will ultimately return somewhere, like Ibrahim knew and he had returned there centuries ago, Ismail knew he had returned there centuries ago, if we have this attitudinal change, a refocusing from the things of this world that can never satiate us. You buy a Lexus today, by tomorrow, and a newer version comes. And so you become a slave. If you were a slave to wanting to acquire, you begin to struggle. That which would have given you joy because it's still functional does not give you the joy anymore. And so it is for us to do a refocusing And that basically is what the clerics were supposed to do. But if the clerics are equally involved in the rat race, wanting to conquer the world, which nobody before them had conquered, then they lose that which would have made them to say, hey, this thing obviously does not count. Because for Ibrahim, alayhi salatu wasalam, for Ismail, the life they lived was such that even if I had power, I would use power to uplift those who are down. If I had resources, I would deploy the resources to put smile on the faces of those who do not have. It again explains why when you slaughter this animal, you go to give to those who don't have. And it's not a one-day thing. You know, if you got the message for one day, that message was supposed to last you for a lifetime. But we are privileged that if we saw another year of slaughtering, you have refueled again. That fire has been rekindled. It runs in that circle. There will be no break. But once there is a break, it will mean that the person only regard in act of duplicity. And the victim of it is that individual, not God. Because he said, neither your meat nor the blood of it reaches God. What does is your piety. So if it is not, if that sacrifice does not don the wrapper of piety, then it is a waste of resources. The 300,000, the 750 with which you bought it is just a waste of resources. And you will again be punished for wasting resources.
All right. Now, let's look at the account of the story of Prophet Ibrahim, which is also referenced in the Bible. He's been referred to as Abraham in the Bible and the son as Isaac. Now, what does that suggest to you about the level of coexistence that should exist between Christians and Muslims, and by extension to other religions, about the coexistence and the unity that should exist among humanity, irrespective of your religion? Talk to us about this.
Well, Islam runs on the wheel of knowledge. And if you have the knowledge, then you obviously will have no problem. Now, what, for example, we look at contradiction, if you looked at it from another lens, may just be a paradox. If I told you that I know the truth and I am fixated about that, it will mean that I am so distant from the truth. What my interpretation of the Quran is, what the interpretation of the Bible man is, what the interpretation of the man who worships any other way outside Islam and Christianity is just an understanding of the message that he has gotten as is peculiar to him. It does not represent a universality. And so you cannot claim to have absolute truth about this. You can be certain, but your certainty must not operate to belie what every other person believes in. And in any case, if you were a Muslim, what does the Prophet say? May Allah be pleased with him. He says, you are not a believer if your neighbor is not safe from your tongue and from your activities. And he says, you will find me engaged you on the day of judgment on behalf of the neighbor that you have oppressed. What that does mean is that we are first and foremost members in one large human family as created by God. And Allah says in the Quran that he guides whomever he wills to guide. And it is not for you to want to browbeat anybody. And if I were, for example, to talk to Blessing and I say, Blessing, you are a Christian, you must become a Muslim, and he becomes a Muslim on the basis of her being browbeaten by me, then she does not have the benefit of becoming a Muslim. She does not have the reward of becoming, because she's been forced to do so. And I who are forced, don't even have the benefit of bringing him into it. So, in a nutshell, when you find people fight in the name of religion, it only goes to underscore the lack of religion in the lives of these persons. It goes to underscore the life of religion in the life of this person. Because when you look at it, we just talked about increase in the prices of things. Beyond those who will be doing salah, if you go to market as a Christian, as one who does not even believe in God at all, you say you want to buy tomatoes, you buy at the same whatever. If you got it at a better price, it's because your bargaining skill is sharper than the other who got it higher. But even at that, the price is high. And so it will mean if I'm bitten by a mosquito on the Friday in the mosque, that mosque does not require a visa or land, whatever, to be able to cross to the church the following day to do the same havoc. And so it will mean that we have things that unite us as it relates to what faith you profess. God has not made man the judge. It's not enfeebled as not to be able to deal with this issue. Because in copious passages of the Quran, it said, if it had pleased him to make us believer in one faith, that would have been the easiest thing for him to do. So your relationship with any individual must be on the basis of the texture of his humanity. Because in the passage of the Quran, Allah says, I created you into nations, tribes, in communities in order for just one singular purpose, in order for the purpose of identification. That the best of you, one who is most God conscious. And being God conscious is to appreciate the fact that money is given to me to share with blessing. Blessing is not aware, and there is no way she ever will get to know that money was given. And I come before and I say, somebody left us with this money. This is how it is. How are we going to do the sharing?
Thank you so much for being a part of El Exchange, teaching us more about the essence of this day as Muslim faithful all over the world celebrate Eid El Kabir.
Thank you for having me. That's always mine.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.